The chandeliers in the lobby of the Ashford Grand Hotel blazed with afternoon sunlight, throwing geometric patterns across marble floors polished to a mirror finish. Vivian Ashford crossed the space she herself had designed, but today her steps did not belong to her. Damian Cole walked at her side, half a pace behind, his palm resting against the small of her back as though steering a dance partner. Beneath the pressed wool of his black jacket, something cold and rigid pressed into her spine. A gun. Vivian understood the terms without being told them. No shouting, no running, no reaching for her phone. As she passed the man mopping near the concierge desk, she seized her chance. Her hand dropped to her side, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, her fingers shaped words in the air. "Help me. He has a gun." The mop paused mid-stroke, water pooling at the man's feet, but he did not lift his eyes. Marcus Reyes had learned long ago that the people no one notices are the ones who notice everything. For 3 years he had pushed his cart through the lobbies and corridors of the Ashford Grand, scrubbing floors that guests crossed without a downward glance. Every surface told him a story. A scuff by the elevator meant somebody had stumbled, probably drunk. A coffee ring near the business center meant a meeting had gone badly. In a world that looked straight through him, doing his work well was the only voice he had. But the real reason Marcus missed nothing was his daughter. Sophia was 7, with dark curls that refused to stay in their braids and a smile that could light a room she could not hear. Born deaf, she had taught her father an entirely different way of paying attention. When a child cannot hear her name called, a parent learns to read reflections in glass and shadows on walls. Each morning before his shift, Marcus dropped Sophia at the special education program 3 blocks from the hotel. Father and daughter had built their own private language, part American Sign Language, part the small signals families invent over years together. A tap on the wrist meant pay attention. A tug on the earlobe meant I love you. A palm over the heart meant you are safe. Other parents sometimes offered pity Marcus had never asked for, remarks about raising a child with hands instead of words. He had stopped trying to correct them. Sophia did not need their understanding. She needed a father who showed up, who learned her language, who made her world safe. That morning had begun strangely. Marcus received his usual assignment from the facilities manager, but today the instructions carried extra weight. The VIP wing needed to be spotless, and maintenance staff were told to move quickly and quietly. No eye contact, no questions, no lingering. Renata Cruz, head of security, had been pacing the lobby more than usual, one hand constantly adjusting her earpiece linking her to the security network. Eleanor Voss, the senior front desk manager, whose smile could soothe the angriest guest, had pulled him aside near the elevators. "We have a situation today," she said quietly, eyes flicking toward the executive offices. "Keep your head down. Make sure nothing goes wrong." Vivian Ashford had built an empire on the belief that luxury meant control. The Ashford Grand was the flagship of a chain spanning 12 cities. She had inherited money but earned respect, turning tired properties into destinations. She understood markets, read balance sheets like fiction, could smell a failing investment 3 years before it collapsed. But today, for the first time in her career, she was not the one in control. Damian Cole had stepped out from behind a concrete pillar in the parking garage that morning. Well-dressed, soft-spoken, and holding a weapon with unsettling calm, he had laid out the terms. "We're going to walk into your hotel together. You'll smile at your staff. If you signal security or reach for your phone, people die." The gun at her back was a constant reminder of the stakes. He steered her along routes with fewer cameras, positioning himself so onlookers would see nothing more than a businesswoman and her associate. His goal was ruinous, a contract in his briefcase backed by forged signatures that would sign over controlling interest in her company to a shell corporation the moment she added her name. Clauses buried inside would strip her authority immediately, making her removal a formality. He had chosen the hotel deliberately. Surrounded by her own employees and her own legacy, she would keep up appearances rather than risk a scene in a five-star lobby. What Damien hadn't counted on was a program Vivian had funded 3 years earlier, supporting deaf children with scholarships and equipment. At its launch, she had sat in on classes, watching teachers and students communicate with their whole bodies, and the experience had moved her to take a basic sign language course, just enough to greet the students, to follow a simple exchange. She never imagined it would become a lifeline. Passing the janitor near the concierge desk, she made a decision in 3 seconds. He was bent over his mop, but she could see his reflection in the polished floor, and she recognized him. He always arrived early, dropped his daughter at the special school nearby, sometimes practiced hand shapes from a manual in the break room. If anyone could catch her silent cry, it would be him. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. Help me. Gun. Forced contract. Don't look up. She kept walking, face composed, breath even. Behind her, she heard the soft splash of the mop resuming, slower now, more deliberate. Marcus's heart hammered as he watched her reflection in the marble. The CEO had just signed to him for help. His first instinct was to look up. Her last sign told him not to. He kept mopping, kept breathing evenly. Shout for security, and Damien might panic and fire. Run for help, and Vivian would be left alone with an armed man. Do nothing, and he would carry that failure forever. He had maybe 90 seconds to decide. He thought of Sophia waiting for him after school. He thought of the promise he'd made to her dying mother, keep our daughter safe, come home every night. But he also thought of the promise he'd made to himself, never stand by while someone suffers because acting feels too dangerous. Marcus set down his mop, grabbed a yellow caution sign and placed it directly in the pair's path near the VIP elevator's wet floor. A small delay, maybe 30 seconds, but enough time to reach the supply closet phone unseen. Damien frowned at the sign and steered Vivian toward a side hallway instead, his grip on her arm tightening slightly. "Excellent maintenance standards," he muttered, in a tone suggesting excellence should not be inconveniencing him. Once they'd passed, Marcus moved fast, reaching the supply closet and dialing security's 3-digit extension. Renata Cruz answered on the first ring. "Maintenance? Go ahead." "This is Marcus Reyes, day shift. I need eyes on the VIP route right now. The CEO is in danger. The man with her is armed. Don't approach directly. Silent response only." A pause. "I'm pulling up the cameras now. You're certain about the weapon?" "She signed it to me. Sign language. She told me he has a gun and is forcing her to sign a contract." Another pause, then Renata's voice, brisk and professional, speaking to someone else, before returning. "I'm sending Eleanor to create a diversion in the main lobby. I need something from you. Move slowly down the VIP hallway. Create legitimate reasons for delay. Make it look like routine work. Buy us time to set up a controlled response." "I can do that," Marcus said, and meant it. For 3 years he had been invisible in this building. Today, that invisibility would be his greatest asset. Years earlier, before Sophia was born, Marcus worked in private security, risk assessment for corporate clients. He'd been good at it, calm under pressure, able to spot a threat before it fully formed. Then his wife got sick, cancer, fast and merciless. After the funeral, he quit. The job demanded a hardness he no longer had in him. He needed work that let him be home for his daughter, that didn't ask him to gamble with lives. So he became invisible, a janitor, a man who cleaned floors and went home every night. But the training never left him. He still clocked a hand held at an unnatural angle inside a pocket. He still read exits and sight lines, calculated response times, saw the hidden architecture of violence and movement. That training was what kept him steady now. Damien was no amateur. Any direct confrontation would turn deadly fast. The only way forward was to wear down his control gradually, let security respond without sparking a bloodbath.
Marcus wheeled his cart down the VIP hallway at an ordinary pace, unhurried, unremarkable. At the elevator bank, he pressed the service call button, then made a small adjustment to the control panel. He didn't disable the elevator, he simply switched it into maintenance mode, which would require anyone using it to call for assistance first. A small thing, barely noticeable, but it would force Damien toward the service stairs or a wait. Either way, more time. Damien and Vivian reached the elevators 90 seconds later. He pressed the call button and frowned when nothing happened. A small sign on the panel read "Temporary Maintenance." "Is this normal?" he asked. Vivian kept her expression neutral. "The system glitches sometimes. We can take the service stairs." His eyes narrowed. Something about the hotel felt off, though he couldn't name it. Too quiet, too empty in places that should have had more staff. His grip on the briefcase tightened. Service stairs, now. Marcus watched from near the housekeeping alcove, angled so he could track their reflection in a decorative mirror without meeting anyone's eyes directly. As they turned toward the stairwell, he moved again, this time to Eleanor Voss at the front desk. She looked up from her screen, professional smile unwavering even as her eyes flashed urgency. "He's taking her to the service stairs," Marcus said quietly. "Renata needs to know." Eleanor's fingers flew across her keyboard, routing the message through the internal security channel. Then she rose, smoothed her jacket, and crossed to the entrance where a knot of guests had just arrived. Her voice carried warmly across the lobby, directing staff toward luggage, asking about dinner reservations, a wall of normalcy meant to convince Damien the hotel was running exactly as it should. 3 floors below, Renata Cruz was coordinating a very different kind of response. She pulled up feeds from the service stairwell, the VIP meeting rooms, the executive offices, and asked Theo Banks, the hotel's technology specialist, to begin logging every angle, every timestamp, evidence for later. Then she made the hardest call of her career, to the police, instructing them to stage 3 blocks away, no sirens, no lights. If Damien heard sirens, he would start shooting. Damien pushed open the stairwell door and waved Vivian through first. The stairwell was bare concrete, a sharp contrast to the marble and crystal beyond it. As they climbed, he spoke for the first time in several minutes. "I'd hoped we could handle this civilly, walk into a nice office, sign some papers, part as business associates, but your hotel seems determined to complicate things." Vivian kept climbing, heels clicking against concrete. "I don't control the elevator maintenance schedule." "No," he agreed, "but you control a great deal else, which is exactly why this contract exists. You've built something impressive, Miss Ashford. Unfortunately, you built it on a foundation my associates now own. Your grandfather's debt, 30 years old, the leveraged buyouts your father arranged, the properties mortgaged and remortgaged, it all comes due eventually. We're simply here to collect." They reached the VIP floor, and he directed her down a hallway to a small conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A leather portfolio sat waiting there on the table, arranged earlier that morning, the contract already prepared, already carrying forged witness signatures. All it needed was her name. Damien shut the door and gestured to a chair. "Sit. Review it if you like, though the terms are non-negotiable. Sign and you walk out with your life and your reputation intact. Refuse, and this becomes a much darker story."
Vivian sat slowly, pulling the portfolio toward her. She began to read, not because she meant to sign, but because every minute bought more time. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages, though her voice stayed level. "This will take time, 12 pages of clauses." "Take your time," Damien said, one hand resting inside his jacket, fingers on the weapon. In the hallway, Marcus worked with careful precision. He'd watched them enter, watched the door close, noted how Damien had positioned himself between Vivian and the exit. He couldn't go inside without risking violence, but he could still shape what happened outside it. He angled his cart to partly block the hallway, slowing anyone trying to leave in a hurry, then knelt beside an electrical outlet and pried off the cover plate as if checking a wiring fault. To the cameras, he was simply a maintenance worker doing routine work. To Renata, watching from below, he was marking his position, ready. Her voice came quietly through the radio on his belt. Officers are staged at the north and south stairwells. Theo's recording everything. When I give the signal, I need a distraction in the hallway. Noise, not an attack. Can you do that? He pressed the radio button twice. Yes. Inside, Vivian had run out of pages to stall with. She reached the last one, and Damien's patience ran out with it. Enough, he said, pulling a pen from his pocket. Sign it now. She picked up the pen, set it against the line, and did not write. Instead, she looked him directly. One question first. How did you know about my grandfather's debt? That was sealed 40 years ago. He smiled. That's the beauty of patience. Information doesn't vanish. I've been planning this for 3 years. Every document, every secret your family buried, I found it all. His words were as much confession as boast, and Vivian understood he hadn't done this alone. Inside help meant evidence. Evidence meant this could still be fought, in a courtroom if she survived to reach one. She lifted the pen again, angling her hand so her fingers could shape words beneath the table, out of his sight. Help, now, close. In the hallway, Marcus caught the sign through the glass panel. He stood, grabbed a metal tool tray, and let it fall. The clatter was enormous. Damien's head snapped toward the door. Marcus knelt slowly, gathering tools, muttering an apology. The distraction lasted 5 seconds. Enough. Renata and 2 officers appeared at the end of the hall, moving silently, taking positions on either side of the door. She held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, and opened it. Damien spun toward the sound, weapon coming into view, but before he could aim, Vivian moved. She'd been watching Marcus through the glass, tracking his hands. As the door opened, he signed one word, down. She dropped beneath the table as Damien's attention fractured. Renata and the officers surged forward, weapons raised, voices overlapping in commands. Damien grabbed for Vivian and caught only air, then swung toward the officers. Marcus stepped into the doorway and signed again, words meant for Sophia, the private language between father and daughter. You are safe. It's over. Come home. Vivian, still crouched beneath the table, saw every word. Damien spun again, trying to track too many threats at once, his control breaking apart. He raised the gun. Officers shouted. Then Theo Banks, watching every feed, cut the conference room's lights remotely. In 3 seconds of darkness, officers with night vision moved in with total efficiency. When the lights returned, Damien was on the floor, disarmed, restrained, already shouting about lawyers no one was listening to. Renata read him his rights, while Theo's footage played on a tablet nearby, a complete record from parking garage to conference room, kidnapping and extortion, laid out frame by frame. The arrest took 17 minutes. Damien was walked out through the service entrance. Vivian gave her statement in her office, voice steady, though her hands still shook. When the detective asked how she'd signaled for help, she explained sign language, Marcus, reflections in a marble floor. The detective promised to commend the maintenance worker, but commendations weren't what occupied Vivian's thoughts. Sitting alone in her office an hour later, she thought instead about how close she'd come to dying in a building she owned, surrounded by systems she herself had built. And she thought about the man who had saved her, someone she had never once spoken to, whose name she'd learned only that afternoon, who'd been invisible to her until the moment she desperately needed him seen. Nathaniel Pierce, the district attorney, arrived the next morning with preliminary findings. Damien Cole hadn't acted alone. He'd been financed by a shell corporation with organized crime ties, and he'd had inside help, someone within the Ashford organization who had supplied access codes, security schedules, and confidential family financial records. The investigation was ongoing. More arrests were coming. Vivian listened with a calm that surprised even her. She had spent her career building walls, constructing hierarchies that kept her separate from the people who worked for her, believing distance meant safety and control meant security. Damian Cole proved her wrong in the most brutal way possible. She thanked Nathaniel for his work, promised full cooperation, and asked him to leave. She had something else to do. Marcus was cleaning the third floor when Eleanor found him. The executive would like to see you in her office. He followed her up to the executive level, his footsteps silent on carpet thick enough to swallow sound. He'd been up there before, but only after hours, emptying trash cans. In daylight, the space felt like another country.
Vivian stood when he entered and gestured to a chair. "Please sit. I need to talk with you." He sat carefully, aware his uniform was still damp from mopping. She studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand how a janitor had become the most important person in her building. "I need to thank you," she said, "and apologize. You saved my life, and I didn't even know your name. You've worked here 3 years, and I never once acknowledged you. That's not acceptable." Marcus hadn't done it for recognition. He'd done it because it was right, because he couldn't have lived with doing nothing, because his daughter was waiting for him to come home. "The police told me you learned sign language for your daughter, that she's deaf. Is that right?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Yesterday when I signed to you, you understood instantly. You didn't hesitate." "There wasn't time to hesitate." She nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what happened, about what it means. Yesterday I learned that power is mostly illusion. The person with the most control in that building wasn't the CEO, and it wasn't the man with the gun. It was the janitor nobody noticed, who saw what everyone else missed and acted when it mattered." She crossed to the window. "I'm going to make changes here. Better security, better support for frontline staff, and I want to start a fund for families raising children with disabilities, scholarships, therapy, equipment. I'd like to name it after your daughter." Something cracked open in Marcus's chest. "You don't have to do that." "I know. I want to. Because you learned her language, you were able to help someone who needed it badly. That deserves to be honored." She returned to her desk. "I'd also like to offer you a new position, Director of Employee Safety and Wellness. You'd oversee programs making sure every worker here has real support, significantly higher salary, and a schedule that works around your daughter." Marcus stared at her. "I'm a janitor. I don't have a degree." "You have something better," Vivian said. "The ability to see people everyone else looks past, the courage to act while others freeze, lived experience of being overlooked. This company needs someone who understands that, not from a textbook, but from living it." He thought of Sophia, of medical bills, of their cramped apartment, of the future he wanted to build for her. He thought about how real change comes from people who've actually lived the problem. He said, "I accept." 3 months later, on a cold afternoon in early spring, Vivian stood in the lobby of the Ashford Grand as a new plaque was unveiled near the entrance. It outlined emergency protocols, including a silent alert system, letting any employee signal danger without speaking a word, designed by Marcus, implemented by Renata, funded by the Sophia Reyes Foundation for Children with Disabilities. Sophia stood there holding her father's hand, watching the small crowd with curious eyes. She didn't fully grasp what was happening, but she understood her father was being honored, and that filled her with fierce pride. Vivian approached and signed carefully, "Your father is a hero." Sophia's eyes widened. She looked at Marcus, who nodded, then signed back, "I know, he's my dad." After the ceremony, Vivian found herself alone with Marcus near the concierge desk, where it had all begun. The marble still gleamed, still held every reflection. But now, looking down, Vivian saw not just herself, but Marcus beside her, equal, necessary.
"I never thanked you properly," she said.
He shook his head. "You thanked me with action. The fund, the job, the safety protocols, those will help people long after I'm gone." Still, she began to sign instead of speak. "Thank you. You saved my life. You changed everything." He signed back. "You gave me a chance to matter. That goes both ways." Sophia ran across the lobby and pulled her father's hand toward the door. He waved to Vivian and let himself be led away. His daughter's laughter, a sound he would never hear, carried instead in the bounce of her steps. Vivian watched them go, and for the first time in years felt something like hope. Not the calculated hope of a quarterly earnings call, but the raw kind that comes from realizing you'd been wrong about everything and choosing from here on to be right. She went back to her office and looked out over the city. Somewhere in it, Damian Cole sat in a cell awaiting trial. Somewhere, the senior executive who had sold the company out had already been arrested. And somewhere, a 7-year-old girl who couldn't hear was teaching her father new signs, new ways of seeing the world. She picked up her phone and called the foundation office. "I want to expand our reach, not just children with disabilities, every family that's struggling, every parent working 2 jobs, everyone who feels invisible. I want them to know they matter. Find me the programs already doing that work." The director promised a list by the end of the week. Vivian ended the call and stood at the window, watching the sun go down over a skyline full of lives she'd once believed success meant rising above. Now she understood it meant reaching down instead, pulling people up, building systems that recognized everyone's humanity. She thought of Marcus mopping floors in a building she owned, spotting danger in a reflection. She thought of Sophia's laughter. She thought of the contract she'd almost signed, the empire she'd nearly lost, the life saved by a janitor who refused to look away. Night fell over the city, lights blinking on in window after window. Vivian pressed her palm to the glass and made herself a promise. She would not forget. She would not slide back into the comfortable distance that usually separates executives from the people who clean their floors. She would not let the fear fade until the lesson faded with it. She had been given a second chance, pulled back from the edge by hands that signed instead of shouted, by courage that asked for no audience, by a father's love that had taught him to notice what everyone else missed. That chance came with an obligation. To honor it, to keep learning from it, to become the kind of leader who understood that real power isn't control over other people, but the ability to build conditions where everyone can thrive. She turned from the window and sat down at her computer. There was work ahead, systems to build, policies to write, futures to shape, but for the first time in her career, it felt less like conquest and more like service. Less like climbing and more like building, less like proving her own worth and more like recognizing everyone else's. Far below in the lobby, the night shift janitor began his rounds, walking the same halls Marcus once had, pushing the same cart, mopping the same floors, but knowing now that the work was seen, that his presence counted, that his value wasn't measured by a title or a paycheck, but the simple fact that he showed up, did the job, and deserved respect for both. The marble gleamed under his mop, throwing his reflection back at him, and he smiled at what he saw there. That was the legacy of one terrifying afternoon, a CEO who signed for help and a janitor who refused to look away. Not just a life saved, but a system rebuilt. Not just a criminal caught, but a foundation created. Not just gratitude offered, but dignity restored. The hotel's lights burned against the dark, a small, warm beacon in the night. Inside, people worked and rested and lived their quietly invisible lives, carrying the knowledge now that someone was watching, that someone cared, that every person deserved to be seen. And across the city, in a small apartment, Marcus Reyes sat on the floor with his daughter, teaching her new signs and learning from her the oldest language there is, one that needs no sound at all. They signed about their day, about the ceremony, about everything still to come. When Sophia finally drifted to sleep, hands still moving faintly in some dream conversation, Marcus pulled a blanket over her and sat for a long while just watching her breathe. He had saved a life, but more than that, he had proven something he'd always believed, that kindness isn't weakness, that paying attention to the people others overlook is never wasted, and that learning someone else's language is never a burden. It's a gift. The city slept on around them, millions of hearts beating in the dark, each one carrying a story no one else could see. And across town, a plaque on a hotel wall reminded everyone who passed it that silence can be a cry for help, and that the people you never notice might be the ones who notice everything. That was the lesson. That was the gift. That was the story that would be told for years afterwards, in boardrooms and break rooms alike, in sign language and in spoken words, in the quiet moments when people chose to see instead of overlook, to act instead of turn away, and in doing so, made the world just a little safer, one conscious choice at a time. The Ashford Grand stood tall against the night sky, its windows lit with life, its future unfolding one deliberate decision after another. And somewhere inside it, a marble floor went on reflecting everything. Holding the memory of the day a reflection became a revelation, a signal became a rescue, and someone the world had stopped seeing turned out to be essential all along.